So thanks very much indeed. So whilst we wait for Phil to rejoin us, because I think we're having a slight technical problem, what I would suggest is that everybody just goes around and maybe introduces themselves.
Okay, shall I go first?
Yes, please do, Cliff.
Yeah, okay. My name's Cliff Roberts. I work for a company called James Fisher. I'm representing the ship owners here today. I have been in shipping for too many years, starting off with the oil companies. I've worked for Shell, BP, Exxon. I now work for James Fisher, and I'm currently the Quality, Safety and Environmental Director.
Thanks very much indeed, Cliff. Simon?
Thanks, Andy. Hopefully you can hear me. Give me a thumbs up if you can.
Yep.
Good, excellent. Yeah, well, thanks very much. Just a quick thank before I start talking about myself. Thanks to the organisers, the panel and the moderator who's had to drop out at the moment. And of course, thanks to the audience. Looking forward to your questions. In terms of, let me introduce myself. My background is an ex-Lloyd's register surveyor, but I've now for 13 years, and I've now been with international registries for another 10 years. Quickly, what is international registries? International registries provides the day-to-day services to the Republic of the Marshall Islands Flag Administration. And as such, the Flag Administration is one of the top 3 flags. And we have about 175 million gross tons, and remain on all the quality MOUs and so forth. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thanks very much indeed, Cliff. Phil, welcome back.
Thanks very much. Would you like to continue with the introductions, and then I'll carry on?
Absolutely. Thanks very much. So it was just me to go. So good afternoon, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Andy Mccarron. I'm the commercial director for Lloyd's Register. So I run the innovation, marketing, sales and product management within the marine and offshore division. Been with Lloyd's since about February of last year. Prior to that, I was with General Electric for approximately 20 years through various incarnations. And throughout that time, been involved in the integration of new technology across multiple industry sectors, including renewables, oil and gas, naval, metals, mining, offshore, and obviously marine.
Thanks very much, Andy. Thanks, everyone. So, as I was trying to say before, but I think nobody could hear me, welcome everybody, not only to our panelists who've just introduced themselves, but also to our delegates. Thank you very much for joining us today. This webinar is hosted by Maritime London in partnership with Maritime London member Lloyd's Register. And we will explore today how remote capability has supported the industry over recent months, and how and whether this is a new normal that will transform how we do things in future. My name is Phil Parry. I'm a director of Maritime London. I'm also chairman of maritime search and benchmarking company Spinnaker Global, and I'll be moderating the session today. Before we get started, I'd just like to thank Nicola Good at Lloyd's Register and Olga Jacques from Maritime London, who've worked exceptionally hard to make this webinar possible. There are 147 signed up attendees today, so welcome and thank you all. So you've met the panel, Simon, Andy and Cliff. And just before we get started on the detail, just a few housekeeping notices. There's no fire escape and no fire exits. You'll have to look after yourselves if you smell burning. And I'll just ask you, please, to use the chat room for questions. Please don't use it for hello messages and chats between friends. And please resist the temptation to showcase or sell your expertise in the chat area. Otherwise, we won't be able to see the questions. We are recording the session today. And to minimize background noise, the panelists will keep our microphones on mute when we can. Apologies if you do hear any dogs, cats and children. And lastly, but importantly, the questions in the chat area will be answered, as many as we possibly can, at the end of the session. So on to the subject matter. Classification, flag states, ship owners and operators have adapted quickly to incredibly difficult working environments. And let me ask you all to think about whether industry in general and world trade would or could have coped if this crisis had happened only 10 years ago, before broadband, before video conferencing, and before smartphones were what they are today. What would have happened to the supply chain? What would we not have been able to do in 2010 that we can do in 2020? And have we catapulted ourselves forward in that we will now adopt as normal practices things that otherwise might have taken us another 10 or 20 years to accept? So I look forward to hearing from the panel about the success stories emerging, but also what the barriers and restrictions are and what implications the crisis will have. So panelists, you've all introduced yourselves already. I wonder if you could just give us an introductory set of your thoughts, please, on how the utilization of tech has been accelerated due to the pandemic. And could you also tell us what you mean by tech so that we all know what we're talking about today? I'll keep you all to no more than 5 minutes each, if I may. And Andy, can we start with you, please, then Simon, and then Cliff?
Thanks very much, Phil. So I think you're right. There's a myriad of technologies that are involved in maritime's digital evolution. And I think we all know that the bridge of every single new build tends to be more advanced than the last one coming off the slipway. Never mind the advances that we're seeing onshore in terms of hardware, software, and systems. So for Lloyd's Register, our focus is around 4 main areas, which is asset assurance, structural health management, asset performance and condition-based monitoring, and then maintenance optimization. I think our tech drive is really around the use of digital technologies and applications to either enhance our services or provide outcome-focused product solutions to reduce operational expenditure. What we're trying to do with the use of technology is to simplify the whole process and really focused on delivering client and industry outcomes. In terms of the pandemic and the acceleration, I think it's definitely forced us all to rethink how we work, and we're all now certainly more reliant on technology that we have at our disposal, whether that's Zoom or Teams or ensuring that documents are saved just purely on shared drives. For Lloyd's Register, I think the most notable change in technology that we've seen with respect to the pandemic is the uptake of remote capabilities and remote services. Given the impact of quarantine restrictions, of accessing our facilities, or just simply moving people around the world. So what we've seen is about a quarter, so 25% of our surveys are now done remotely. This is up from around 10% prior to the pandemic. These involve a variety of technologies, including live streaming, static exchanges of images, where our surveyors, obviously located all around the world, are interacting with our clients, so the ship managers or the owners and operators of those assets or vessels. And we've noticed that the various sectors are gravitating towards their preferred methods of how they actually now interact with us.
Thanks very much, Andy. And can we move on to you, Simon?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Thanks, Andy, for that. I don't want to repeat what Andy has said. As the Republic of the Marshall Islands Administrator, we're very much a paper-based organisation, administration. Of course, we've had to sort of digitalise ourselves. Luckily, we're already going into that process, and such things as certificates are very much digital these days. Although not in all cases, but a lot of them are. From our point of view, with 28 offices and 400 employees around the world, we did experience shutdown in many of those offices, or at least altered working patterns. But found out, of course, that like most companies, you can actually work from home. I'm not really aware of any shipping companies that ceased to operate during this COVID period. So I think we've all kind of managed. Just to say a little bit about the administration in terms of our not our reliance, but our delegation to the class societies such as Lloyd's Register. So we're very much regulating some of the work that they do on our behalf. So not necessarily involved in the actual technology itself, but obviously have to be satisfied with the way this technology is used, and especially, as we mentioned there, remote presences on ships. What else can I say about this? I think that in terms of what technology we could be discussing today, obviously remote presence and remote surveys is a very key one. But I think there are other aspects. Today I received emails on artificial intelligence from marine equipment makers and how they could look into planned maintenance and predictive maintenance. We're also aware that of things such as, again, I'm talking about artificial intelligence, not something I'm particularly well versed in, but if you're a container ship operator, for example, there's the issues of unclassified or misdeclared dangerous goods, and how artificial intelligence can actually look through declarations to highlight items that may be of concern. I think there's, of course, the use of drones as well, where you don't want to get people onto ships, you can get things on using drones, and of course drones can also be used for surveying. And I think there's many more, but I guess today we might concentrate more on the remote surveys. And just quickly say on that as far as the flag is concerned, if a remote survey is to be adequate, then it has to be essentially give us the same feel and feedback as a person on board. So thank you.
Thank you. And Cliff, from the perspective of a ship owner, can we have your thoughts, please?
Yeah. Again, I don't want to go over what's already been said. For me, the technology that has accelerated really has been the communications. As was already muted, shipping companies haven't stopped work. We were already working remotely, as a lot of people were, working while you travel to the ships, working on the ships. But what it has done is draw us together through new systems like Teams, Zoom, and other such things, where we're now looking to hold our seminars, officer seminars, and that sort of thing, through this remote dial-in type of thing. I mean, this is my first webinar, for example, where I've been presenting, and this has all been brought about by the pandemic. Use of drones and that sort of technology, I don't think we're going to go into much today, but we have had some surveys which have been conducted remotely with Lloyd's, so I can give you a little bit more information on how they were conducted a little bit later on.
Okay, thank you, Cliff. So,
Phil, can I add just one more thing? Sorry.
Please do.
Yeah, just I was going to say, as we said, the shipping companies and the shipping world and logistics didn't come to a halt. But what we did get out of this experience here is that we did, well, as a flag administration, and I hope as a class society as well, we felt we had more assurance over what was going on. It wasn't as if ships were just left to themselves. There was still some assurance that the quality and the safety of the shipping was being maintained. And as Cliff was saying, a lot of that was done through the communications that were available to us.
I would fully reiterate that in terms of the collaboration during this period has been phenomenal in terms of bringing all the parties together. Technology is an enabler, but I would say that it hasn't been the underlying foundation of this. This has very much been about everybody actually getting together to get through this pandemic. And I think, as we go through this discussion, I think that key to the success of this and the future proofing of it is the continued collaboration to look at how do we work together or much closer together as a stakeholder community.
Thanks. It is interesting. I mean, you do wonder actually if we have now discovered ways of doing things better, in as much as I spoke yesterday to the chief executive of one of our clients who has recently negotiated an acquisition and said that the 5 or 6 parties involved have been far easier to meet with on a daily basis than it was to be able to meet with them on a weekly or monthly basis prior to the pandemic, because everybody's willing nowadays to do video meetings, which hitherto they never were willing to do. So moving on then, we're speaking mainly about the rise of tech in the time of COVID-19, and the main item that's arisen is remote surveys. So can I just ask, what are the physical restrictions in terms of using remote surveys, and do they actually provide advantages, or are we only using them because we have to? Will we go back to the old normal after the pandemic, or will we continue to use remote surveys because they've actually proved to be better in some cases than what we used to do? Whoever wants to go first may, yeah. Otherwise I shall pick on one of you.
Oh, you're muted.
I said I can start if you like, Phil.
Please do.
So in terms of the physical aspects, I'm gonna leave that one to Andy. I think actually about what their class society's experiences are on the physical aspects. But in terms of the benefits, I mean, and now and in the future, I think that right now, of course, we had to do things, as I said, to try and provide this assurance that the vessels were indeed being maintained. There was a great deal of difficulty that although you could see what was there, you couldn't always actually fix it because it relied on, say, a service engineer or something that couldn't get to the vessel. And we haven't got that far of how to cure that one. I'm sure we can. But on the aspect of what can be done and what this means in the future, I think that the ship operators that I've spoken to have very much felt that this isn't sometimes always an easier task to have a remote survey, but you can certainly use this technology to allow you to do these surveys at a more convenient time, such as when you're at sea. That may be a possibility rather than when you're in port and you have SIRE inspectors on board and the list goes on. Yeah,
which of course is a significant issue.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing is, just purely from an environmental aspect, if you haven't got to fly people all around the world to see things, that's got to be a positive way forward.
Andy, can I just ask you, from the perspective of someone who sits behind a desk all day, what physically happens with a remote survey? Do we have a crew member wandering around with a phone or an iPad, corresponding, if you like, or communicating with an LR surveyor back at headquarters?
That's basically right. So it's effectively, I mean, because there's a number of things that we have to do to check as well to make sure that somebody's not falsifying, effectively doing the survey. So we could, for example, if they're doing an engine room inspection, they may pre-record that sort of thing because obviously it acts as a Faraday cage as a ship. So they would be walking around effectively with a mobile phone, but we would insist that they actually go up to the engine, take the nameplate, for example, so that we can then actually verify, exactly IMO numbers, etc., of those type of ships. Then they would effectively then pass that information back to our surveyors and also the other stakeholders involved as well. So, as Simon was saying, that's a very easy interaction with the flag administration as well. And then we would effectively carry out the equivalence of that. So I think from our side of things, that accuracy and equivalence piece is absolutely critical. And we've been exceptionally happy about, what we've seen from remote surveys, the quality of the images and videos and live streaming where that's permitted, subject to, the high bandwidth VSAT type connectivity, has certainly been good enough to compensate for a surveyor's loss of the sort of other sensory inputs. And we're excited about what we're seeing. What I would say is I would reiterate, again, what Simon is saying. Preparation is key. It can take longer to do a remote survey, but I think what we're now finding is that the more preparation that's done beforehand by the various parties or interested parties is critical to the the success of the survey being undertaken in the most efficient way.
And will we forget all about this once we all go back to normal, or will we continue using them?
So I think, so it's a really good question. This is the new norm. It's as simple as that. So we will be using remote surveys from now on. I think each of these, aspects needs to be looked at from a return on investment perspective. So again, as Simon and Cliff were saying, is the fact that these can be done at a more convenient time. So there is a clear return on investment, in terms of the best use of everybody's time. There's a reduction in the travel time associated with getting, people on board the ships to do the actual surveys themselves. But I think we need to look at them on a case-by-case basis to make sure that return on investment makes sense.
And is connectivity good enough?
In certain circumstances, yeah. So look, bandwidth is still a challenge. So while VSATs have taken great steps forward in terms of the data packages, some of those data packages are not geared up to supporting live streaming functions. And as I said before, ships tend to be a real network Faraday cage. I think that being said, we have had some excellent results where enclosed hull surveys, so inside tank inspections, were managed via live streaming. So it's on a case-by-case basis, but we can also take it as a non-live streaming, as I say, if we can validate the authenticity of the survey that's being carried out.
Understood. Cliff, from the owner's perspective, I mean, first of all, have you experienced remote surveys within James Fisher?
Yes, yeah, not the 500 though. We've just had 2 over the last few weeks. Most of the surveys, if I'm honest, have been delayed or deferred, where we've been able to do that. That seems to be the preference at the moment from class societies and flags and other bodies that are involved in surveys and inspections. But in the 2 that we had, it was very much as you would expect. The master with the equivalent of a mobile phone, and he was streaming back. We used a little bit of live. We took some videos. In this case, it was an anchor. It was an anchor being replaced. So we took some photographs of the serial numbers of the anchor. We videoed the anchor being replaced, and we talked to the surveyor on the telephone, and that's how that was covered. It was rather a simple and straightforward survey, to be honest, but it worked. In my view, it worked very well.
At risk of sounding either obtuse or dismissive, remote surveys sound like, from a technological perspective, a relatively easy thing to do. Are we yet running into the issues of lack of consensus or lack of standardization in relation to these? If we think Betamax versus VHS, are we yet experiencing that kind of issue in relation to surveys, or is it as easy as I think it is?
So I was going to say, I'll jump in. I think from an LR perspective, a key question is, what role does the regulator play in the adoption of remote surveys? i.e., IACS, so the International Association of Classification Societies, has a number of options: a recommendation, unified interpretation, unified requirements, or procedural requirements. Our current view is that eventually there will be a role for IACS to play in remote surveys. That it's a key focus should be in standardizing the minimum scope of activities required in a remote survey across all of its members. And clearly, and I think as we've sort of said, I think remote surveys must be equivalent to the conventional survey, and IACS may need to prescribe the minimum extent of a remote survey, which will allow each of the members to compete with the best customer experience, technical experience, and technology platforms that deliver that standardized, to that standardized extent.
Cliff, Andy talks about the customer experience from the perspective again of a ship owner. Do these kinds of surveys provide the same level of reassurance as having a surveyor physically on board the vessel?
Well, we manage ships and we also own them. For our, I would say that providing, at the moment, I think just to go fully remote would give us possibly some concerns, but I think also flag would also have some concerns. But where I think it has a real benefit is in some of the surveys and some of the inspections. They can be done remotely, and they can be done, if you like, in part remotely. For example, our plan maintenance system. We have an AMOS system. I think other providers are available, I think we have to say that. But that can be remotely accessed. So a surveyor, once he gets the correct dial-in details, can access the database, and they can see the maintenance that we've done on the main engine, and they can see the maintenance, and they can see all of this. That provides them with work that they can do up front. Clearly, they would need to go and see the engine or the material that's been maintained to ensure that it's running properly, and it looks like it's being maintained. So I think, firstly, I don't think it's going to take over everything. I don't think we're going to see the day where it's all done remotely, but I think some of the elements of some of the surveys could very easily be done remotely, and that would be a big benefit to the ship owners.
Thank you. Moving on, the forecasters are talking about the mother of all recessions coming down the line. In terms of the other technologies that you've been talking about during your introductions, are we going to need a lot of capital investment, and are we seeing that coming from the commercial sector, or is it all going to come from people like Lloyd's Register Foundation, Andy? What do we think on that issue?
Yeah, I'm a strong believer that any technology integration has to demonstrate a return on investment. I think that's clear. There needs to be, a problem that we're trying to solve, as opposed to a solution that we're trying to dovetail into, a potential problem. I think, as Simon was effectively saying, I think, the concept of in the industrial world, I think that's called frenemies, which are yesterday's enemies are tomorrow's friends, is basically a case of we have to jointly find a solution to some of the existing problems across multiple stakeholders, and breaking some of the traditional sort of silos, let's say, in terms of the maritime world, to really get to the problem that we're trying to solve. I think specifically, around the remote surveys aspect, there's clearly savings in the organizational aspects of it, in terms of the fact that the survey can be done, at a more suitable time for, the owner. The cost of travel reductions as well. A lot of this can run through very basic technology. So phones and tablets. So there's not a great deal of extra investment that needs to be made up front. Documents that will now be, digitalized, so that they can be stored and accessed for future, audit trails, etc., which again can be a timely and costly expense to an organization. The other aspect, I think, is that the video recordings of the entire survey process is possible. So surveyors can go back and verify items as well at a later date. And also the technology allows for the multi-party communication between all the relevant stakeholders. Therefore, decision-making can be much faster. So I think, there are some clear cost-saving benefits to be had by introduction of technology. I think the other aspects that Cliff was talking about in terms of, the machinery plan maintenance systems, that's another area where the CMMS systems, so the computerized maintenance management systems, need to be used more effectively by the classification societies to be able to provide machinery class credits as well. So there's a lot of technology there already, and the investments have been made that we need to enhance, the services and the offerings to the industry to make sure that we're capitalizing on a lot of the investments that have already been made for other purposes.
Thanks very much, Andy. Gents, do you want to add anything before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I'd probably add something, Phil, to this and the last question, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So I think they're both related anyway. It's one of them is that about, this, I think Andy's covered the return on the investment, and in the future, if there were a downturn, would we want to invest? We'd only invest if it's going to have a return, which is the obvious answer. But I think it's how far you want to take remote surveys. That's the question there, because as Cliff was saying, that a lot of the work so far is done on sort of a group of items, individual items, a sort of streamlined survey approach where you might have where you might do partial survey, and thus far with the Marshall Islands flag anyway, I'm not aware we've done any complete statutory surveys using remote survey techniques. So I think if you want to go for a complete statutory survey, you're into a different ball game with possibly more expense and a lot more consideration. Not that there won't be pilot projects on that. I'm sure there will be in the near future, where we'll be doing remote surveys and checking the physical follow-up. Of course, that isn't really a remote survey. That's a pilot project, right? But I think that there's clear benefits to the continuing and investing, say, in broadband and Wi-Fi on a vessel. If you can, not have to have a surveyor come out on a launch to check that, a fire hose was replaced or something like that, right? So I think there's a clear benefit in investing in that. And yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thanks. Cliff, do you have anything to add before we move on?
No, I would agree with what has just been said by Simon.
Thanks very much. So obviously we all know that necessity is the mother of invention. And given all that's been said, will we look back at this period as the shock the market needed to accelerate new technologies, new efficiencies and ways of working? Are we 10 or 20 years ahead because of COVID-19 in terms of our attitudes and willingness to embrace this stuff?
Can I start there? I think in terms of attitude, yes, we are a long way ahead. I think in terms of the technology that was there, well, remote surveys existed before COVID-19. We've had this kind of remote presence for at least a couple of years, I think, already. And I think it's taken off and everybody's asking for it now, and everybody's more aware of it now. So I think attitudes, yes. Technology, maybe not.
Yeah, I'd reiterate that. I think, Phil, because it's a really difficult question to answer, because as Simon says, I think a lot of the technologies have been around for quite some time. The remote inspection techniques is nothing new, but we have accelerated that dramatically during the pandemic, because we've been slow to take them up before, because we're ingrained in existing behaviors and practices. So I think COVID has definitely forced a global routine change, and that's made us more adaptable and open-minded. So having said that, I believe that we are definitely being propelled further forward during COVID, but I think trying to put a vintage on it as to how far that's accelerated is probably quite difficult. And I do also think that the underlying stakeholder engagement collaboration that has come from the pandemic is also something that will definitely be a foundational building block needed to enhance this and make sure that it goes on for some time. And we still need to address some of the other challenges in terms of cybersecurity, now as well, because that's a definite increased risk, to the industry as we do digitalize and connect, more ships to the shore. IT awareness, in terms of, I'm going to say, the crews plus the surveyors, in terms of what they have to do, and a new skill set, let's say, not difficult in terms of our personal lives, but certainly bringing that into the professional world is something we need to address. And then, as we said before, I think regulation is something that needs to come around this now as well.
Thanks, Andy. So I can see we've got a number of very good questions popping up, and I can see also that we have friends from the legal and P&I community taking part. I wonder if I could throw a question at you guys. So Julian, sharpen your pencil. Which is whether there are any issues around the use of remote surveys in evidence gathering. Will this kind of evidence be as admissible as physical evidence? Are there any other issues? If you could pop a quick answer to us on the chat area, we'll discuss it if we have the time. Before we move on to the audience questions, we had one final pre-set question, if you like, which is, are there any particular sectors or vessel types that are embracing new technologies, whether it's remote surveys or otherwise, more than others? Is there more open-mindedness in one sector than another? To all three of you, please.
Shall I go first?
Yep.
Our vessels, coastal tankers, trading mostly around Europe. So a lot of the time, we're off the coast. We've got mobile phone range. We've tended not to go for the big VSAT technologies. They're very expensive. So we tend to use the 4G, that sort of thing. We're able to communicate very well through those systems, mobile phone systems, if you like. And I would say it'd be quite a tall order for us to go and set up full streaming capability, through the SATCOM systems, because of the cost is almost prohibitive in some cases. So we would follow on with the fitting of the comm systems. Most of the portable systems we can use, but I would say we wouldn't be the front runners in that. I think passenger ships and container ships need to send a whole heap more data. They already have the technologies, and I think they'll probably be one of the first industries to, parts of the industry, to take this up.
Thanks, Cliff. Gents, any other views on this?
Just to continue one of the points there that Cliff made about passenger ships. I mean, you do see technology being used on passenger ships in terms of crew training, augmented reality almost for crew training. These sorts of things, invested quite heavily in that and their safety manuals.
Just to add to that, I think in terms of looking at some of the adjacencies as well, there are definite early adopters of technology around naval and offshore that doesn't have necessarily the same type of I'm going to say regulation that maritime has. So I would say certainly in the offshore space, we've seen over a 10-year period, the use of drones, digital twins, so using, obviously sensor data to be built into, a digital twin to look at prediction of maintenance. So moving from, time-based maintenance into condition and then into planned maintenance or predictive maintenance. So it's often been driven by the process downtime associated with either component or system failure. But they have used quite a lot of the technologies, in terms of, I'm going to say, AI, machine learning over a period of time. And that comes often from, their, let's say, onshore petrochemical type of systems integration as well, or even aviation background that they've pulled through then into, the oil and gas space. So there's a lot of the technologies there that we need to look at for maritime and make sure that the same cost benefits are there for owners and clients. I think the other aspect is that we've seen customer demand and requirements are also a factor. So things like container tracking, that's an industry-wide initiative as well. So it doesn't go into sort of, small-scale operators. It goes as an industry-wide initiative for adoption of technology. But I also think the take-up of technology is also a function of the fleet size. I think we never have to forget that the average ship owner in maritime owns 5 vessels. So it can become quite difficult to justify that return on investment on a specific operation. So we see some early adopters and early movers on the large fleet sizes. And then I think some of the other sectors are very fragmented. So the bulkers and the tankers, therefore, consolidation or collaboration within shipping also supports the case for technology take up there.
Just carrying on that point about what was almost edging towards big data there from Andy, I think, is that exactly that. These fairly fragmented small owners probably don't see much benefit in it, and I don't see there being a critical mass to make this big data, work at the moment. However, if you talk to the airline industry, which was also mentioned by Andy, and such as the Rolls-Royce and the General Electrics, they'll talk about the gigabytes of data that they gather from aircraft engines, and talking to Cliff's point, about the cost of data transfer. They don't transfer this in the air. They basically come alongside the stand and transfer all this data. Very little amount of data is transferred in the air. So when we're not talking about remote surveys, you don't necessarily have to have this huge data bandwidth. But the point is that I was going to say is that what we need now is somebody to drive a standardization of basically the Internet of Things on shipping, so that an organization such as the ISO or IACS could develop some kind of standardization so that all the bits and bobs that are sent to us can all be interpreted widely and anonymized, and then we would have the critical mass that might drive the information, the machine learning, and the analysis. But right now, I just think, somebody with 5 bulk carriers think I'd rather keep my information secret to me and not invest in lots of sensors.
Yes, and of course that's the perennial issue in shipping, is our desire for secrecy. Although we are opening up quite considerably. I'm going to turn now to the audience questions and commentary, which is pretty lively. Starting with Malcolm. Hello, Malcolm. Malcolm Willingale. Could the panel member say something about the cost savings which remote surveys can generate?
Well, I'll talk about my experience, which is, of course, not actually paying the bill or providing the service. So if you don't mind, take it as a pinch of salt. But cost savings, I think we already touched on. You wouldn't ask the remote survey unless you saw a cost saving. So there are cost savings to be had. We mentioned travel. We mentioned, even if you were doing a remote, say, ISM audit of an office, you don't have to fly everybody around the world anymore, right? So, they might be away. They might still be a superintendent somewhere. They don't have to come back to Singapore. These sorts of things. So those cost savings, I think you can soon see. But also, I have been informed that some remote surveys have cost multipliers attached to them, right? Because of, I think, the preparation that Andy alluded to much earlier on. There is an enormous amount of preparation, and it's not for everybody. It takes the class societies longer on a lot of occasions, so they apply this cost multiplier. This may disappear over time, but right now I'm aware of that. And then I think some operators just see, actual fact, it's a lot easier to leave my crew out of this, having to gather all this data. I'd rather have a surveyor turn up and do that, and I'll pay him by the hour. Thank you very much.
Interesting. Andy, can you counter that and tell us how wonderfully cheap it is?
I would agree with it, and I think that's why I said it is a case-by-case basis. It doesn't suit every application. Preparation is absolutely key. As we said, to the actual survey being done effectively and efficiently. So I think the clear benefits in terms of the cost savings associated with travel, that's pretty clear. But we have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, because in certain situations, actually having the surveyor on board can be beneficial to both ourselves and the owner.
Thank you. So the next question is specifically for you, Andy, from Sean White. Does LR have any plans to issue guidance covering maritime infection prevention and control? Many other class societies have done this, apparently.
So hello, Sean. I hope you're well. It's been some time. So the answer is yes, we do plan to bring that out. It will be brought out quite imminently. So we are building off, obviously, our pedigree in terms of our inspection services capabilities to bring some similar products and checklists associated with that to the industry. And they will be coming out in the next couple of weeks, stroke a month, and it will be called the health product that we will be bringing to the cruise industry. Obviously, the cruise industry at the moment is in a difficult situation, and we're looking to do everything that we can to help not just the perception, but also the safety around returning to cruising.
Thank you. There's been a little chatter stimulated by Ivor's question. Hello, Ivor. And the question is remote surveying causing any issues on board the vessel whereby additional work is required by the ship's crew during periods that their contracts are being extended? And in view of... Sorry, my phone's going. And in view of reports of possible fatigue and well-being issues setting in.
From the flag perspective, I don't think the issue is the remote survey. I think the issue is that the seafarers can't get off the ship, and so it's kind of separate. But I mean, yes, we can let ships sail around completely without intervention and say that we're helping the crew's fatigue, but on the no side, it's that we don't have the surety that the vessel's safe. So it is a playoff, but I mean, it's an absolute disaster for the crew members that they're in this situation. But you have to remember, I don't think these remote surveys are, if it was a full survey with presence on board, I don't think it's taking them much longer at the moment.
Andy, do you have any experience of this? Yeah, so I would agree. I think what's being said, actually, that there's very little onerous activities that we're putting onto the crew to do the surveys in comparison with what's done in terms of the logistics coordination of bringing, a surveyor on board. So in terms of the technology introduction, it's a relatively simplistic activity to be done. And I think, as Simon and Cliff alluded to earlier, is the fact this can be done at a convenient time for the crew as well. So it actually should, sort of alleviate some of the issues that we've previously sort of imposed upon the ships with the services that are provided. What I would also say is that, technology and well-being are very closely interrelated. And there are a number of key areas where technology is being used to address the health and well-being at work. Because it does help us avoid problems. Both mechanical and software technologies, including advanced automation, can actually reduce workloads and stress. So technology can be good for maintaining well-being. So I think it's basically a case of it has to be used in the right way. And we can also use technology to detect problems, either with health and well-being or activities that may compromise safety. So it's very much at the forefront. Of every time we introduce a new service, the seafarer is absolutely at the heart of the decisions that we're making.
Thank you. There's some background noise. I just wonder if anybody is aware if it's from their end, whether they might mute their microphone. Thank you. We have a question from Burak Çelik. I'm not sure if this will resonate with the panelists or not, but he says that during the coronavirus period, they have successfully completed all kinds of surveys and inspections and audits with Marshall Islands, with LR and with NK, except their cargo gear 5-yearly load test. And he says the ball has been tossed between flag and class on this, and both sides allege that they cannot provide an extension until the ship has arrived at a proper port, presumably for physical inspection. Has a solution been found to this by either class or flag? This is the only problem which he has experienced so far during COVID, which has not been able to be resolved. Can anyone shed any light on this?
Absolutely. I think this is directly at me, right? And I may have actually dealt with this case or similar cases through email in the past. So I apologise if I've been the one with the tennis bat batting you back. But this is a very peculiar kind of survey, not only because everybody's scared of lifting appliances, but also because other than the International Labour Organization, which Marshall Islands is not signed up to, so has no basis for issuing these certificates and doesn't issue these certificates. The SOLAS does not cover these lifting appliances, cargo gear. So we don't have any say in how that survey is completed. So I think that's why it's been going back and forward. So if it's a classed item, then it's clearly up to the class society to deal with it, and I think that's where the confusion has come. But if Burak Silak would like to contact me, I'll endeavour to do my best. But right now, I can't really help. We don't have a legal basis to be involved in that certification.
Andy, anything to add on that one?
No, I was going to say that Simon and I can take that certainly offline and try and sort of work through it together. But I would reiterate exactly what Simon said.
Next question from Thomas O'Hare, and I think perhaps Cliff, this could be one for you to lead on. Onshore training currently postponed due to the pandemic, and as technology on board becomes more advanced, onboard internet services improve. Does the panel believe that e-learning on board will become a more common practice?
I believe it will. We've seen all the colleges initially send all our cadets home, and then they set up Teams meetings with each of the cadets, and they were able to do the college work remotely. I know several of the colleges are now looking at how they might get short courses back again. It's the short courses which seem to cause the problems, the lifeboat type things, firefighting, and that where they struggle to keep the distancing. But they've progressed through the MCA. I can't speak for all the other authorities, but the MCA have allowed a grace period for those coming through training that have had interruptions to their training. So the training pretty much has continued for officer trainees. In regards to short courses, I think they're coming back online in the next few months. Those that need them for certification, there's been a grace period, again, provided by MCA and most of the other organisations to allow them to do the training at a later date. And the training on board and the remote training, I mentioned it very briefly earlier. Yes, we as a company will be looking to do more of that type of training going forward. We've got various environmental targets. We're trying to reduce the carbon dioxide, the carbon footprint of the organisation, and this would be a very good way, to cut down some of the flights. You can imagine, bringing 20, 30 people into one location to do training. That's quite a carbon footprint. So we're looking to reduce using those methods. We already run remote training for systems such as ECDIS and that sort of thing. Safety officer training can all be done remotely already. And so, yeah, I just see that getting bigger over time.
It is interesting. We have a ship owner client that is signed up to a leadership development course that we run. And prior to the pandemic, they wouldn't give a second thought to doing the training online. But now we're putting several cohorts through online training, splitting it over several days instead of doing it all in sort of batch together into 2 days. The attitudes have changed greatly. A question in from an old pal of mine, Mike Powell. Mike, hello. Does the panel think the increased availability of real-time or near real-time sensor data will provide greater insight into ship conditions, supporting the remote survey activity?
I think that was sort of covered a bit earlier on, Phil, just to maybe reiterate some of the points that were made by Andy. I think that we talked about sort of big data. I know that, but I think you need data that's been analysed already for some of this real-time data to be meaningful. So there's some challenges over that. But I think yes, but it's up to the ship owner to see the benefit, to invest in that. It's
yeah, because I would reiterate that, and I think we need to sort of define what real time means in maritime, because I think there's real time and there's near real time, as it were. So there's a latency that can be looked at in terms of what is actually necessary in terms of the frequency in which we're analysing data. I think as Cliff was sort of saying earlier, as this can be built out into maintenance, let's say if we broaden it from just remote surveys, equipment today, and a lot of OEMs are bringing solutions to the market, as we said, to move away from the traditional calendar-based maintenance towards something that would be more driven by condition. A lot of that can be done on the edge, so effectively on the ship, where they can look at the condition of the equipment and then make recommendations on when that maintenance needs to be done, which can push out some of the calendar-based, let's say, operation maintenance manual sort of recommendations. That can be led or fed back to the beach through the CMMS system at a lower latency, almost on a dashboard basis, or with low bandwidth collector technology, that can be once per day, for example, or once every couple of days, so that you can get the dashboard aspect of it. I think if we were to move, let's say, leapfrog a couple of years, which looking at some of the other industries, as I say, in offshore and others, where they look at predictive maintenance, that's where we do need some higher frequency sensors on board ships or on board assets. But again, the latency back to the beach, because of the VSAT connections or the investment that would need to be made, would have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, depending on the saving that could be made.
Just quickly, in terms of like remote survey, collaboration with remote survey, you possibly don't really need the real-time data, as I say, because a week or a month is.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't do anything about it half the time anyway. So,
thank you. Just coming back to the question I raised earlier on, to the lawyers in the room, Julian Clark has come back on the use of remote surveys in evidence, and explained that there's no particular privilege or disclosable type issue. And of course, experts have a primary independent duty to the courts. But two issues spring to mind, one being insurance, and two, the risk of cyber interference and hacking into confidential reports. And somebody else, Ifaf Khan, has asked, can the panel please address the issue of cyber security? So bringing those two together, are we at risk of exposing our dirty laundry to those who we don't want seeing it?
Well, as far as the IMO and the regulatory bodies are concerned, then you're meant to be implementing a cyber security officer, but that's about as far as we go, and there's various guidelines on the training of that person, but nothing particularly concrete.
I think there's a number of aspects to this, and I did mention it earlier. The risk of cyber threat has definitely increased or will increase as we go towards more digital services and solutions. There's the IMO guidelines, resolution MSCs 428, in terms of the maritime cyber risk management and safety management systems. There are government guidelines. There is the BIMCO standards as well. And then also there's the cyber recommendations from IACS. So I think it's basically a case of we do have rule sets around those in terms of the interpretation of some of those let's say regulatory or requirements of which people can follow. So the rules sets associated with those, but also the cybersecurity frameworks, which is effectively how do you build out a cyber strategy, which I think anybody that's going to be adopting digital solutions will have to sort of build out as an organization, because the threats will increase, and that ranges from a cyber risk assessment, which builds out the understanding of a potential impact, and then it builds out the IMO ISM codes and SMS codes, which will be the preparation for January 2021. There'll be the compliance aspects of BIMCO and TMSA, and then, as I say, building out a framework of how each organization manages the cyber threat.
Thank you. There's quite a debate been going on on the chat board alongside this about quite how comparable or equivalent remote surveys are versus physical attendance on board when it comes to evidence taking in a casualty investigation, the loss of body language and facial expressions that you might see if you were physically present, and so on. And that has spawned a secondary point about who owns data that is transferred remotely, and the issue of the use of crew's own mobile phones and so on, and what evidence is discoverable. I remember there were lots of fears and concerns about this kind of issue when the ISM code first came along. I'm not sure that this necessarily spawns any questions, although I would perhaps just ask the panel, hand on heart, if you had to choose between a physical survey and a remote survey, would you say that the physical survey is bound always to be the better job?
I think it depends who's doing it.
They're all varied. That's a very good point. It's about the quality of the attendee, or the quality of the person at the other end of the technology. But there's definitely a feeling of a more independent survey if you have a physical person on board. As somebody mentioned, you can see the things that you're not meant to see. But that leads me back to something we said much earlier on about a pilot project for a complete statutory certificate, as an example. I don't think we're there yet for a complete survey. We're talking about individual items, which I'm satisfied with. And with the class societies that we work with, we literally work on the list of these items. So there's a list of must-see items and a list of possibly remote survey items. And I know that Andy was talking earlier on about in-tank surveys, but that is not on our list of remote surveys at this time, as an example.
So I think I would say that surveyors will be on board ships for a number of years to come, and I think it completely depends on the circumstances, Phil. I think, as both Simon and Cliff are saying. So I think if there's a necessity and there's a need, and the remote survey makes sense, then it's the right thing to do, because we can connect with a global network of experts, right the way around the world, both in our own organisation plus the other interested parties. I think it gives an opportunity as well for others to see the survey in terms of both crew training plus surveyor training. So there's benefits to a lot of parties, but it very much depends on the circumstances.
Thank you. So we've reached our time. I'm just going to slip in two final questions, if I may, and then we'll sign off. First of all, a question from Paul Butterworth. We overestimate change over a 2-year period, but underestimate it over the course of the next 10 years. Maybe changes forced upon the industry by COVID-19 is going to change this. So based upon where we're sitting today, are we getting all a bit too excited about this and overdoing it? Or is this something that is going to continue apace now?
I think it will continue at a pace. In actual fact, there's a person on there, Mr. Gale, who's been repeatedly trying to bring into remote and autonomous vehicles as well. So
that's the last question.
Oh, okay. so there you're really at the far end of it, right? If you're going to set that as the last question, we'll talk about that later. But in terms of, I have this old anecdote that about the 10-year and the 2-year. I was on a major casualty investigation many years ago, and I'd just left Lloyd's and I'd come to the Flag, and I had to go on this investigation, and we were miles offshore for many days and nights, and I needed to talk to my senior naval architect. And there was another government on board, as an interested party, and they had this enormous, great big sat phone, and they pulled it out and they were talking away to their seniors, and I was talking on my mobile phone. So as he packed up his sat phone, he comes over to me, and I finished, and he says, how are you talking on your phone? I said, ship's Wi-Fi and Skype. That was it. So 10 years ago we had these kind of things, and now we're talking about remote presences on board. It has. I kind of agree that we don't get too excited about it. Ships have always had communications. I think it's just more exciting now, as Andy said. You can collaborate with lots of experience and intelligence in one place where you need to be. And then I leave it to the autonomous ship question later to go into the real.
So for me, I think it's about technology pathways. Very similar to Simon. I was going to sort of recount a story of when I used to work offshore in 1998, but we used to have 9,600 baud rate connections. So if you used to send more than a 1K email, the whole thing used to crash, and that was it. You were out of comms for the next 24, 36 hours. So I think, the advances that we've seen are dramatic, and I think a lot of them are like the almost the boiling frog type situation. They've happened slower than we were anticipating, so it's basically a case of we probably haven't noticed some of that technology as it's been introduced. I think COVID has accelerated an understanding of what's available, and now it's our responsibility to actually map out what does that look like in terms of a safe and pragmatic integration of technology to ensure that we're future-proofing the industry towards a vision of maybe autonomy, but certainly sort of progressive demanning, let's say, over a sort of a 5 to 10 year horizon.
So just to give Robert his audience, if you like, Robert Gale from the MCA has asked the question a couple of times about how automation will help propel technology forward in the shipping industry. So perhaps because it's the subject that's been, the topic at many conferences over the last 2 or 3 years, does the panel have anything further to say on automated shipping? Is it just around the corner, or do we need another COVID-19? Do we need COVID-20 to perhaps propel automation that bit further forward more quickly?
Can I just say about the automation that we're looking in part, we particularly like automation where we don't have to put a person into a dangerous space, so drones going into cargo tanks, all this sort of thing. We're very keen, we'll invest in that, for health and safety and to save people having to do these jobs. But just, the full autonomous ship, as a ship owner, I don't think we're anywhere close at this moment in time. Not as a company, at the moment. There are some major hurdles still to get over, on responsibility and liabilities and other such things. So I see it, a steady trek towards, more technological advances rather than a big leap.
Thank you, Cliff. Yeah, so just carrying on from Cliff there, I mean, there are many things to be worked out, but I'm sure Robert Gale is probably involved in some project somewhere in the world, because I believe that we've seen Rolls-Royce and others test autonomous tugs in the harbours of Copenhagen. I think Lloyd Register was probably involved in that. I'm fully aware there's a very small 40-foot barge that sails between the east coast of UK and across to Belgium, I think, delivering Mersey oysters or something like that autonomously. These are all little tests, really. But I don't know. I think there's so many questions about redundancy, maintenance, of self-healing, and there's so many questions about collision avoidance, which are probably being debated at the IMO in the MASS project, which if Rob could tell me what the acronym is, Marine Autonomous Ship Systems or something like that, MASS. So I think there's much going on. The regulator's a way of trying to catch up in that or be ready. I know that class societies like Lloyd's will have their AL or their autonomous class notations from sort of 1 to 9 or whatever it is now, I don't know, varying levels of autonomy, such as some of the autonomy might be around controlling the rev range of an engine or the the pitch of a propeller or something like this in weather conditions, but not really going to the fully autonomous thing. And not to sort of keep going on about this, but I mean, it's great to remove people from sea, from danger, if that's possible. But, you know, I'd hate to think that, you know, I saw an estimate that 200 million people are going to lose their jobs because of COVID-19 in the world, that we would just add another tens or hundreds of thousands to this from seafarers. And then, you know, in the close waters, the closely confined waters, it's quite difficult to see this working. I'm sure the Internet of Things and collision avoidance through AIS and other aspects will attempt this. But could we see, you know, large deep water hubs where, you know, on one side of the ocean and then another side of the ocean, the sort of barge is propelled across autonomously? Well, I could see that, you know, not too far away.
Andy.
Yeah, I was going to say I would build on both of those. So autonomy is some way off, but we have to start. So I think transformation comes through a number of transition steps. And I think, as Simon was saying, we've been involved in this, you know, in terms of the study of autonomy for a number of years, from the Rolls-Royce vessels, and then also more recently with the Project Themis that we're doing in Singapore to look at the ocean-going vessels, which is effectively where we're mirroring the systems that they have on board today to look at those degradation modes and collision avoidance, etc., to refine the rule sets that we have around those ALs, or autonomy levels 1 to 6 within the shipwright rules. But it is, again, about the partnerships of the equipment suppliers, the owners, operators, the class societies, and then bringing in a standard and regulation around testing and robust testing in terms of the technology readiness levels and the insertion of those TRLs within the ships, and then looking at the failure modes and consequence analysis associated with each of those systems and subsystems that are put on board the ships.
Thank you, Andy. And a parting comment, actually, from Paul, which is an excellent comment, I think, which is actually, you know, we're talking all about tech, but from an anti-collision perspective, as he puts it, the Mark I eyeball looking out of the window can prevent those VHF and radar-assisted collisions we know so much about. And of course, that brings to mind the notion of alarm bells going off left, right, and centre during the midst of a crisis and a panic. So I think that's a nice point to finish, that, you know, tech has enabled us all to communicate better, but ultimately here we are, a bunch of human beings chatting to each other. And at the end of the day, it is we who will live or die by our use of tech and knowing when to ignore it as well. So thank you all to our audience who've turned up in very large numbers. Thank you, Cliff. Thank you, Simon. And merci beaucoup to you, Andrew, who is joining us from Paris. And finally, thanks to Lloyd's Register and, of course, to Maritime London for organising and hosting today. Thank you all very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.